Okay, going to call a budget meeting of council order for Friday, January 24th, 2025. Take approval of the agenda, please. Councilor Norbury.
Thank you, Mayor Kukalka, that the January 24th, 2025 Budget Council Meeting agenda be adopted as presented.
Seconder, Councilor Roxana. All in favor? Carried. New business 3.1, 2025 operating budget supplementals. Report dated January 24th, 2025 from the Chief Financial Officer regarding the 2025 operating budget supplementals. Recommendations, please. Councilor Julik.
That council receive the operating budget supplemental report for discussion.
Seconder, Councilor Hoffman. All in favor? Carried. Does staff want to give an overview, Ms. Scott, or we just want to fire questions?
Yes, because the supplemental was submitted by the Director of Finance, I would like to give her the opportunity to provide council with a brief overview of what these supplementals hope to achieve.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. There's two supplementals in front of you. One is for multi-factor licensing, and there was some gaps that were missed in our security for finance and IT-related issues. And there's a supplemental that will reflect on the cost for the next 5 years. The report that's attached, the supplemental report, shows the risks, the threats, et cetera, for Council's consideration. The other item is for unlimited Questica licensing, which is our budget software. And currently, there's only, I think, 10 licenses that staff have. And going through the budget process this year, we had to shut people off at times and put other people on to be able to prepare the budget. So we had to do it in stages. So I looked into getting additional licensing so that all staff could be able to access Questica. And it was cheaper to go unlimited than it was to get the 10 licenses. So this also gives the ability for administration staff to have review status as well, so we can keep on track of projects, looking at where our numbers are. There's much better reporting out of Questica than there is the financial software.
Thank you. Any questions from council? Councilor Norbury.
No questions, Mayor Kukalka. So I'll move that council approve the multi-factor licensing supplemental starting in 2025 at a cost of $2,720 per year.
Seconder, Councilor Julik. Discussion? Call a question. All in favor? Carried. Councilor Roxana.
I'll move that council approve the request to purchase unlimited Questica licenses starting in 2025 at the cost of $5,000 per year.
Seconder, Councilor Hoffman. Discussion? Call a question. All in favor? Carried. Okay, moving on to operating and supplemental. Report dated January 24th, 2025 from the Chief Administrative Officer regarding the 2025 operating supplemental. Recommendation. Councilor Roxana.
The council approve the request to hire an additional full-time mechanic in the Public Works Department.
Seconder, Councilor Julik. Discussion. Councilor Norbury.
Thank you, Mayor Kukalka. So first off, want to say, I mean, it's a little farther on our agenda, but it's, staff did an outstanding job at looking at their budgets and finding a way to bring costs down. I can appreciate that it's incredibly hard to do that when, costs of living increases are so high and the additional costs in terms of, benefits are also quite high at this time. So I think staff did an amazing job. But with that being said, this position would take our 7% increase up to, 8.5, 8-ish. And we have not looked at capital projects at this time. I'd be concerned that if we want to meet our 9% mandate, we would, we're stuck choosing between. Do we get a new mechanic? Do we look at capital projects? So With that being said, a lot of these things I'm looking at quite seriously, I guess. I'm trying to do my diligence here, so I do have a few questions. I'll start off with one, and we'll leave it open. I don't want to, monopolize the mic, but one of the things that made me think about this position and the value in it, and if there would be value in it, is what is the external services that we are requiring due to the workload of our mechanics. So, AKA, in the report it says that there's a heavy workload. We have to hire people. We have to send out vehicles while people are on vacation. I'm just curious what the cost would be that we have incurred because of that.
Ms. Scott?
I can provide one example. In 2022, when the mechanic was on leave, during that time, just a quick look in the accounting software, from our 4 top places that we would get work done at, the cost was just under $19,000. And so that was just for the top 4 that we normally use. There could have been more in addition to that. That was just a quick search, and that was using 2022 as an example because the mechanic was off on leave. I wasn't able to find time to dig further into actual costs for this meeting.
Follow up? Okay. Councillor Noxana?
Thank you. I'm just wondering what the period of time the mechanic was on leave for, or what the period of time this $19,000 was for.
Ms. Scott, do you have those details?
I am not positive on the length of time of leave. I think it was 6 months, but I don't want to give you the wrong information, so I will ask our Director of Operations if he can provide council with that answer.
Thank you, Ms. Scott, Mayor and Council. Yes, our mechanic was on leave in 2022. It was during the time that I was onboarding. She was vacant from her position for almost 6 weeks, I guess. So.
It's a difference from.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Julik?
I'm just curious, is this position for a journeyman Red Seal mechanic or an apprentice?
We are asking for a journeyman.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Councillor Hoffman and Councillor Norbury.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I was missing the idea of what we would be saving. The other aspect of this, have we left maintenance work and just sort of the stuff that we want to be doing undone for long periods of time on some of the vehicles? Like, are we just not keeping up with the work?
Ms. Scott?
We would definitely like to improve the preventative maintenance program that we have. We are doing preventative maintenance. We would like to improve that preventative maintenance. But there are definitely times during the year when there is a backlog of work that does need to be done. Whether it is the preventative maintenance or whether it is actual repairs, there are times throughout the year where there is a backlog of work that takes some time to catch up to.
Follow up?
Yes, please. I get that there can be a backlog. What I'm worried about is there going to be times when we have 2 idle mechanics because we have caught up on our backlog. I'm assuming there's other things that they can do, but let's just ask the question. Is there a risk that we're going to have idle mechanics for a part of the year?
Yeah, I think one of the concepts that the CEO just spoke to was to prevent the backlog. So with one mechanic, they see some backlog. I think with 2 mechanics, it would not. But Ms. Scott?
Yeah, there is not anticipated to be any time where there's nothing for those mechanics to do. The preventative maintenance would definitely keep them busy, not just the preventative maintenance, but the inventories, the ordering, the logbooks that they have to keep as well. But again, in case I'm forgetting to mention something important, perhaps the Director of Operations can provide some additional information there as well.
Okay, thank you, Mayor and Council. Just refer to some notes that I have taken. So the biggest issue that we have within the district is, and it wasn't until I started looking into it, realizing that we have an estimated 200 pieces of equipment, mechanical equipment, that we need to provide attention to. 200 pieces of equipment, 365 days a year. Not saying we're going to touch all of the equipment in the same day or spanned out over the course of the year, but it is equipment that needs required attention. So with one person, stuff does become backlogged, and we need to be proactive on it. For a long time, the district has been, in some cases, reactive to their maintenance program. To have a proactive maintenance program within the community will not only allow us to be able to extend the life expectancy of our equipment, it's going to save us money in the long run.
Okay, thank you. Follow-up, Councillor Hoffman.
No, that's good, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Nober and then Councillor Chulik.
Thank you, Mayor Kakalka. So, in my experience in Tumble Ridge, we've only. But first question: have we ever had two mechanics? Full-time mechanics.
Not aware of it. Ms. Scott?
We have not had two full-time mechanics that were categorized as full-time mechanics. In 2021, we had a full-time mechanic, but we also had the fleet manager that was a certified mechanic, and we also had our director of operations at that time that was also a certified mechanic that could assist the actual mechanic with work as needed.
Okay, follow-up.
Yeah. So, to summarize, I apologize, but I do want to make sure that it's clear that we had a fleet manager and a mechanic on staff at all times to work on vehicles. Do we not? So, of those two positions, do we not have a fleet manager anymore?
Scott?
We do not have a fleet manager anymore. The fleet manager was not specifically for just working on equipment, but was able to assist to help prevent that backlog and do some of that preventative maintenance.
Follow-up, Councillor Nober.
Thank you, Mayor Kakalka. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me in that, because honestly, if we've managed with one mechanic this whole time, unless we've had a doubling of our equipment in the last year, why would we have two mechanics? But if there was always like a 0.5, 0.6, whatever, that individual who could jump in when it was needed and can go do other duties, that makes a lot of sense to me. Because I find it a challenge because backlog, we could bring in part-time staff, we can get seasonal staff to help with that backlog, but a full-time person, I would be concerned. We're doubling up on service without doubling up on our capital infrastructure. Thanks.
Yeah. And just before I go to Councillor Julik, I remember the fleet manager was a position that was brought forward by the previous CAO / Director of Operations. It was brought forward on a trial thing, and I don't believe it was actually successful. There was things that were not being done. Councillor Norby, you sat on that council. Councillor Julik.
I think the reasoning here is sound, and I just would like to clarify, get clarification on why a journeyman mechanic and maybe not looking at an apprentice position.
Ms. Scott?
That is a question I'll defer to the Director of Operations.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Regardless if we hired an apprentice, the apprentice eventually becomes a journeyman, and we would have to have a place for that journeyman. For me, I would believe that a journeyman mechanic onboarding with the district would not only benefit the district in a whole, but their counterpart. I think, two working together, one has a skill set that the other may not, and we would be making two mechanics better.
Follow? Good. Okay, I do have a couple of questions. I guess, it was already brought up by the CAO in regards to 2022. We spent 19 grand in equipment in 6 weeks, probably something that we needed. I do see a big concern, and maybe not in 2025, but if we start looking at the future years of the increases as it goes along, I look at where we are at today and where we were at before. I mean, I don't see a huge increase in equipment amount of numbers. I understand that staff had mentioned we have approximately 200 pieces of equipment. I mean, I understand in regards to maintenance and, even pre-maintenance on some of the equipment that we have within the municipality. But all the equipment that is within the municipality is not all used. Like, if we could break it down, maybe, Ms. Scott, how much winter equipment do we have? How much summer equipment do we have? You know, like, to me, there is a difference when we start talking, oh, we have 200 pieces of equipment, we need 2 mechanics. But yet we have winter equipment that, you know, is used mainly in the wintertime, can be serviced in the summer. We have summer equipment that can mainly be looked at in the winter. So do we have a breakdown of that? I don't want to know pieces of equipment. I have a lot of it in my own head. But if we can have a breakdown on how much summer equipment we have compared to how much winter equipment we have.
I do not have that information handy. Again, I will defer that question to the Director of Operations. Hopefully he can answer that question for you.
Mayor and Council, I'm sorry I do not have those totals for you at this time. Majority of our equipment can and is used year-round. There are certain pieces of equipment that are definitely seasonal, snow blower, the street sweeper, golf carts. Yeah, so as far as those particular numbers, I do not have those for you at this time. Yeah, I'm sorry.
And there's nothing to be sorry for. I'll be honest, it was a question that, as the debate starts, you start thinking about things.
Yeah.
So I don't expect staff to be able to answer everything ad hoc. I think that's important when you come in for your agenda review to ask those questions. It's just a question that just came up. You know, I understand from staff side that we're trying to add a position, and from my side, I got to be able to answer why we're going to start adding 2 mechanics to a community that, one, we didn't have. Yes, we had a fleet manager. Their role was a total different concept in regards to, a lot of it came down to asset management and tracking and stuff like that. I'm quite aware of that position. I was still on council at the time. So it was like, that's my concern, is looking at adding another mechanic for staff, to staff, that we have to build, I have to build an answer to it. You know, I do have some concerns about it when I haven't seen a big increase in equipment. And I understand that from staff side, talking about, you know, trying to get that regular maintenance done and preventative maintenance and such. But when I hear that it was first updated by staff in 2022, we spent $9,000 on a 6-week leave. That's 20 grand. Like, it's, you know, year one, it's, we're looking at, you know, around the $130,000, $35,000 mark. That's a lot of 20 grands. It's just yeah, I have a hard time with this one. I got Councilor Norbury and then Councilor Julik.
Thank you, Mayor Kakalka. I do echo a lot of your same concerns, same things that I hear in the community. You know, this is not, it's not a negative comment towards staff, but I do have a lot of questions from people, you know, or they compare us to other similar sized communities and they point out the fact that there are less staff and they're able to still operate a community, which they don't have the service levels that we do, right? That's always my defense. They don't have the service levels we do. Our community can go toe-to-toe with their community and services any day of the week, guaranteed. So I'm still trying to, you know, give it an honest shot here because, yeah, again, as I said, we're doubling the service without doubling the capital. So what's the downtime that we had last year that we could have prevented with this position? Like, that's something that I'm trying to think of, right? Downtime means loss of service. How much downtime did we have?
Ms. Scott?
That is a number I don't have, so again, I will defer that question to the Director of Operations.
So thank you, Mayor and Council. In terms of vacation time or sick time, I didn't have the time to get that information together as far as what was down during those periods of time. One thing I can say is that with one employee, there's a possibility of 30 absences and additionally more with leave without pay, depending on whatever the situation is that happens with that employee. But they are guaranteed that they could have 30 days off through their collective agreement. If you break down the estimated cost of a contractor, that's $1,000 a day. We're looking at 30 days. That's equivalent to roughly 6 weeks of employment, $60,000. So, and that's if we can get those resources. Another thing that I would like to add is that since onboarding, we did have a catastrophic failure on one of our emergency generators that we put in. It was at the fire hall. So since then, we've implemented a maintenance program where we are PMing every generator within the community weekly. so that we can ensure that everything is operational when it comes time to need this equipment. Also, in saying that, we have now implemented a PM schedule for our recycle building where the mechanic is taking care of the compactor. If the compactor goes down, I'm not sure what direction we go in because it's a vital piece of equipment in the community. So everything affects service level. That's anything that's down.
Okay, follow up.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Kaka. So I appreciate the concern about coverage during staff absences. But my question, I apologize, Mr. Bradley, how much equipment downtime did we have last year? That's what I'm looking for. How much time was, we weren't able to use the loader because this mechanic could have fixed it. That's what I'm looking for, because that's a way that I could say to the community, you know, remember that time when the loader was down for 2 weeks because we didn't have a heavy duty mechanic? This could solve that. Or if it can't, that's fine too, because it's a specialized piece of equipment, but that's what I'm looking for. So how much downtime did we have of equipment that this position can prevent?
Ms. Scott?
Yeah, and so I believe Director Bradley said he didn't have that information. I think part of the reason why we don't have that information is because we weren't specifically tracking it that way. So I don't know if we have that information to give you. And I think that was the answer that he gave you, but again, I will defer that to him so he can answer that better.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Scott, Mayor and Council. Again, like Ms. Scott was saying, we haven't been tracking that equipment downtime that way. Examples that I can give, the Willie was down, we were waiting on parts, and sometimes in dealing with some of these pieces of equipment, we need to deal with the professionals that sold the equipment to us, so we are kind of waiting for them. Just because of their expertise. One great example is that this winter, just before December, the grader went down. Fortunate that we were only waiting for parts, but we did have a mechanic that was able to rectify the situation and have that piece of equipment up as soon as we possibly could.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jilic?
I'm in favor of it. I know the price tag always gives us a little bit of sticker shock. I think for me, the important part here is we have staff who have, I think that Mr. Bradley has given us a lot of reasons why it's a positive step forward. I know from my own experience, this is also part of succession planning. If we don't have somebody else to pick up the wrenches when the other mechanic chooses a different career path, that causes a problem. The importance of having somebody within our organization that knows specific pieces of equipment, like the recycler, whatever Director Bradley was talking about there, that's not something that anybody's just going to have the expertise to go in and fix. I think that it's important that we have staff that's familiar with the equipment that we have, can reach out to those part suppliers, knowing where to go. Like, to me, those are really big deals. I used to work in a shop, and if you didn't know the right place to go, you might be paying double, triple what you maybe have to pay otherwise. So I'm in favor of this, and I guess I would just like staff to have the opportunity, if there's some other reasons that they came to the conclusion that the best way forward was to hire somebody that we haven't asked the question about, and they have the information and just haven't had an opportunity to share it yet.
Yeah, I think we asked staff to give an overview, and they gave the overview. So if there's anything there, it should have poked out. Unless you have a direct question. Councillor Hoffman?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, rotating this in my head as well, and I think there's something to be said for some redundancy in such a critical position. It could be that our mechanic gets injured. This is not a light work situation. They could be out for a substantial time. And what actually convinces me is with the question of, will they have enough work between the two of them for a year? If the answer is yes, and they're extending the life of other equipment, I think this is worth the upfront investment. And I hope to see longer lifespans on our equipment and everything upkept. And if something, hopefully not, happens to a mechanic and they're out for 6 weeks or 6 months, we do have something on staff. I don't want to rely on outside sources. You never know what their schedules and commitments are. You never know what their expertises are. I'd rather develop in-house. So when it comes down to it, I don't have a problem justifying this for our town. I think we do have a lot. We have a high level, and I'd like to maintain it. And it very easily can drop with an injury to our mechanic or a decision by our mechanic to leave. And that becomes far less likely with two. So I'm actually in favor of this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions from council? Okay, so the motion on the floor is that the council approve the request to hire an additional full-time mechanic in the Public Works Department. I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Mayor Kakalka is opposed. Motion carries. Overview of the 2025 draft operating budget. Report dated January 24th, 2025 from the Chief Financial Officer regarding the overview of the 2025 draft operating budget. The council receives the overall, recommendation. I was going to read the recommendation myself. Councilor Norberry.
That council receive the overall overview of the draft operating budget report and presentation. I don't want to leave it for information because we might want to debate, so we'll just receive it.
Yep,
For
no problem.
discussion, sure. There we go.
Seconder. Councilor Julik. All in favor? Carried. Ms. Scott.
If council would allow, the Director of Finance has prepared this presentation, and if council would allow, I would like her to go through the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. It's my pleasure to present to you the draft operating budget for 2025 to 2029. It's not moving. Okay. No, it's not. There we go. So I wanted to start off with, as you know, council set up a mandate early in the year to help give direction to the directors in preparing their budgets. And council set a mandate of 9% for the 2025 operating budget. As the $380,000 had been utilized from operating reserves, that meant staff had to build up their budgets to a maximum of a 5.2% to meet that 9% mandate. So that is what we worked on. So the process that we went through was the directors went and put their budgets in, and then they prepared to have a review done from the CAO and the CFO. When we sat down and met with the directors, the CAO and myself, we went back all the way to 2019 and we looked at all of their budgets going back. We reviewed whether if things had been budgeted and never not expended, they never were going to those amounts. We also reviewed the opposite, where they were always going over budget, so they weren't budgeting sufficient funds, and ensured so that way when we brought forward our budget, we knew that these are reasonable numbers and we're meeting the mandate and we're not impacting service levels. So for each one of the departments, we went through this process. And then once that was completed, all of the directors went back, they updated it in the system, and I did a final review of it to ensure that all the changes were made and everything looked like it was going forward as we had agreed upon. But before I go right into the budget, I want to talk about reserves, because I want to have council, before we start making some decisions, we want to start talking about reserves. So there's statutory reserve funds. Those are funds that are limited to what you could utilize them for. So there's things like the community works funding, growing communities funding, where the provincial government gives us rules and regulations. There's other reserve funds that are established by bylaw. So we can only utilize those reserve funds for how it's outlined in the bylaw. And capital reserves, if there's capital reserves that are not defined by the bylaw, but they're there, it can only be used on capital. It cannot be used on anything operating or ongoing operational costs. So it's only for statutory reserves. The other type of reserve funds we have is called operating surplus funds. Operating surplus funds are those funds that we have in excess in a year. A budget's just a guideline, so quite often you'll have excess funds at the end of the year and it runs into this operating surplus. And in 2024, Council adopted a policy that set the mins and the max for this operating surplus. And that was the 2-month minimum. And that means we can meet, that a district can meet their emergency needs. So if something unforeseen happens, that's what those operating reserve funds are for. Because operating surplus can be utilized for both capital and for operational. So definitely valuable to have that 2-month minimum. And the maximum is about 4 months. If you have more than 4 months of your operational needs, those should be looking at rolling over into the capital fund. So it's also a mechanism of funding the capital reserves and building up our capital reserve to maintain our infrastructure. So based on that information, here is a glimpse of where we are at. So if you take a look at the balance of our operating surplus for the general fund, it was $13 million is where we're estimating. We're still working on numbers, these aren't firm. The 2-month minimum is about 2.1 million and the maximum is about 4.3. So based on that information, there's $8.7 million extra. So these are things you can think, council can think of during this budget process and those projects. There's $8.7 million that can be utilized towards those projects. It could be rolled over into the capital reserve fund. But I do recommend that operating surplus only be utilized for one-time only capital. It's not to go and meet operational needs because as you'll see later in the report, it sort of just kicks tax implications down the road. So one-time only projects, like you can have it for, say, a review that wanted to be done, or you can have it for doing sidewalk. But these are numbers to have in your head as you're deliberating later on about the capital and the special projects. So there's 8 million there. I also really want to highlight where we're looking at with the water surplus and water sewer surplus in capital. You have the sewer operating surplus and the capital is about $1.7 million. That is to cover your water treatment facility and all of your water lines. That's your whole amount that you have in a capital reserve. My concern is that's not sufficient to meet the capital and maintain or asset management refurbish. Same with the sewer. We're sitting at a total, absolutely, actually, sorry, I should go over here. Sewer, we have about $2 million. That is our total. That total amount we have is for all of our sewer treatment, all of our sewer lines, everything to do with sewer. And I want to highlight that water cannot be sent on sewer, and general cannot be given to water or sewer. So while it looks like the district has a ton of reserves, $38 million for general, you have to think of all of the buildings that you have, all of the roads you have, and all of the cost that goes towards that, and the maintenance of all of those facilities, because that's where you look at it. One building alone could be up to, like a community center, well over $20 to $30 million. So that would use a significant amount of your portion. I mean, you would yet leverage that against grants, but it does give a truer picture of where we actually are at with our reserve funds. So here is an overview of where the money went for 2024. It's a pie chart that you guys are all quite aware of. And then for 2025, you'll notice that there's a slight change in it. So for 2025 operating expenses, Public Works I think is about the only one that goes down. All of them have slight increases and they're all meeting the mandate. And an easier picture to do is coming up, but right now, you look at your percentages. Right now, your Public Works is 19% of your overall budget. Your government is 27%, which is pretty standard. Government services includes a lot of the extra things in there, grants, giving money to other governments and organizations, so those tend to be larger. So it's not a case of, oh, it's all being tied up in administration. The community center is 26% of the whole amount of the budget. So there actually is a larger significant portion going to recreation in the community, so they definitely, District of Tumbler Mids promotes recreation. And when you look at each of the budgets individually, you'll see that there is, as I had mentioned, slight increases to all of the budgets except for Public Works. Public Works had a slight decrease, and it's a great comparison. So in summary, the good news report is that the increase to taxation at the end, with all of the adjustments, would be an increase of $771,771. That's a really unique number, so as a finance person, I was really surprised. That's where we came out, double-checked it a few times. And so there's some reasons for that increase. $380,000 of that increase is because operating reserve funds were used for ongoing operating costs. There's negotiated contracting increases. There's also been a decrease in the interest we were earning. We were nice in getting about 5.3% interest on all of our investments, and it's sitting and dropping down to about 3.85 on some of the ones that are coming to be renewed, but we're pretty stable on those for the next couple of years, but it is coming and it's starting to be reflected. And then, of course, as we all know, there's been increased costs for goods and services. So how does that impact taxation? Well, that is, I've got three numbers here. The first is showing what 2024 is, and yes, it looks like a great, huge increase by going up by that $771,000 for 2025, but it actually works out to about $48 per average household. And if we hadn't utilized operating reserves, that's the orange amount, that it would have been the increase. So if council hadn't have utilized those, that's where we would be looking at coming in at. And that would be about $24 per average household. So the big impact of it is definitely for making your decisions moving forward. I want to caution council about considering using operating funds for our, because I know it's been discussed at times, using those operating funds for ongoing operations, because the impact is, right now, it's a 7.6%, 7.06, I should say, increase to taxation, but you would have been about 3.5, 3.48 if you had not utilized those operating reserves. It just sort of pushes it down the road, and it's definitely something to think about, because at some point, you have to collect the money, and the reserves go down, and as you can see with the operating reserves and the reserves the district has and the significant assets, you want to ensure that those funds are available. And that's sort of the overview I have available for you at this point to start off our budget deliberations.
Thank you very much for that. Any questions from council? Councillor Julik.
I know we've talked about this a lot of times. I'm just going to make sure that it's imprinted on my brain. So the water and sewer reserves that we have, currently it is felt that they are not at the limit. Currently it's felt that those reserves should be higher, and we cannot, and part two is we cannot buff those up with reserves that we have right now. Those dollars can only come from water and sewer charges. Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct. But Ms. Scott?
Yes, that's correct. The cost for, if we had to replace a section of major water line, if we had to replace a section of major sewer line, what we have in reserves is likely not adequate to be able to fix that, depending on the size of the infrastructure that we needed to replace or renew. And yes, to your question that we cannot move what's in those other statutory reserves to the water and sewer.
Follow up?
No, I'm good, thanks.
Ms. Scott, just a ad hoc question. Maybe staff can look it up if they have an opportunity. But I know the blowers were replaced down at the lagoons, and then we did some lagoon repairs. Can we just get if staff's able to look that up, just hold that number to the side and just give council an idea when we're talking about what's in reserves there for, you know, you mentioned major water breaks and stuff, but what that cost was. The cost was significant, and I know there was some grant money there, but if we could just have what that cost down at the lagoons.
What year was that?
I'm not sure.
It would just help us find it.
I would say within the last 4 years.
Okay.
Was it that early? Was there? Yeah. Might be later.
2017, 2018?
Yeah, it might be in
We
there
will look into
somewhere.
that.
Councillor Hoffman.
Thank you, Mayor. Just for my own clarification, piggybacking on Councillor Julik's, what if there is an emergency? I know we had a pretty contentious discussion last year of how much we already bumped this, and it'll take time for reserves to build up. So I'm not sure if we're talking about increasing it even further or just showing our vulnerability. what is the mechanism? Are we allowed to take a loan and deal with it that way? Or I'm just imagining there's something does really break and it's $5 million to deal with. How do we deal with it?
Yeah, it'd be by loan, but Ms. Scott?
Yeah, just to make sure I'm not giving you incorrect information, I will defer that question to the Director of Finance to make sure you're getting the right information.
Yes, Mayor and Council, you can go out to borrow money. We can borrow up to 30 years, but it's about a 6-month process to get, because we have to go, unless we have it as emergency and we have an order, or we have an order from the health. So if you have an order or it's deemed an emergency by, say, Northern Health, then we can go and we'll use that order to go and borrow money. And it has to be repaid. The length of time we can borrow up to is 30 years. But if it's a case that we do not have an order and it happens, we have about a 6-month process to get approval from the electorate.
Oh, thank you. Follow up? Good. Okay, any other questions from council in regards to the presentation? All right. Ms. Scott, any questions emailed?
Let me just have a quick look here. No.
Okay. Take adjournment. Councillor Knox-Allen.
That the January 24th, 2025 Budget Council meeting be adjourned.
Seconder, Councillor Norberry. All in favor? Carried.